We have a great panel today talking about a topic that I think is super timely in New York City right now, which is how urban agriculture is evolving and what's it mean for all of us. So I'm going to hand it over to moderator Lisa Held, and enjoy. Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren. So we have the honor of kicking off the whole event. Very exciting. So as Lauren mentioned, my name is Lisa. I am a journalist. I cover the food system for Edible Brooklyn and Edible Manhattan, and also publications like Civil Eats and Eater. And I also host a podcast called The Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network. And actually, Rafael has been on it with me before. So we have 6 people on this panel, and we have 30 minutes to get through what is the future of urban agriculture. So I'm going to try to keep things moving. Since we have limited time, I'm not going to have everyone go in depth on what they do. So if you want to know more about them, what they do, their companies, their work, you can stalk them after the panel or look them up. But to get started, let's just go down, and everyone, if you can introduce yourself, just say who you are, what you do, very briefly.
Hi, I'm Henry Gordon-Smith, founder and managing director of Agritecture Consulting. We're a global technology-agnostic urban agriculture consulting firm.
Hi, I'm City Councilman Rafael Espinal. I represent neighborhoods in North Brooklyn. I am one of 51 City Council members and also leading the conversation around urban agriculture in our city.
Good morning. My name is Viraj Puri. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gotham Greens. We are an urban farming company headquartered and founded here in Brooklyn with operations in several U.S. cities.
Good morning. My name is Onika Abraham. I'm director of Farm School NYC. We've been training New Yorkers in urban agriculture with a real understanding and grounding in food justice and community work for over 8 years.
Good morning. My name is Yemi Amu, and I'm the founder of Oko Farms, which is an urban aquaponics company. We do a lot of education, research, design, and we currently operate probably the only outdoor aquaponics education farm in the city.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aziz Dehkan. I'm the executive director of the New York City Community Garden Coalition. We've been around since 1998. Thank you, Rudy Giuliani. And we advocate to support and protect and create community gardens throughout the city.
Awesome. We have such a diversity of experience on this panel, which is really cool. I mean, we have people who are actually farming, we have policy, we have design. It's like a lot of amazing perspectives. So because we have all these amazing perspectives, I really want to use this opportunity to talk about some big pressing questions that are going to really affect the future of urban agriculture. So I'm going to ask a question, and then we'll just go down and have everybody weigh in, and then we can respond to each other, see how that goes. So I thought like one interesting place to start is to talk a little bit about perceptions of urban agriculture from outside of this world. One of the biggest criticisms that people sort of lob at urban agriculture is that it doesn't, and presumably won't ever, produce enough food to really feed the residents of a city. And there's some research that has looked at this, and people say it can't possibly feed everyone in the city, or at least it can't even make a meaningful dent in the real food needs of a city. So based on your work, how do each of you respond to that?
So in my work, before I started the consulting firm, I was a blogger, and so I've been researching urban agriculture around the world for almost a decade now. And in that pursuit, I understood that urban agriculture isn't as it seems in the West. So globally, the FAO estimates we grow probably 18 to 25% of the global food supply in and near cities. So the perception that agriculture can't feed cities, I don't think is entirely accurate. I think it can contribute a meaningful portion of the food supply, although not all of it. The second thing is that urban agriculture shouldn't just be about the production of food, but it should be about a driver of the knowledge we need to grow food. If we develop cities without the understanding of how we produce, sell, distribute food, we're missing something in the urban context and the future of sustainable cities. So what we've done in the West is we've moved agriculture out of the city, and we're paying the consequences of that. Food waste, pesticide use, lack of transparency. if we bring agriculture back into the city, we're stepping towards getting to a more sustainable and resilient food system as we had in the past.
I think Henry pretty much hit a lot of the points. He hit the nail on the head. But I would add that, urban ag is important for the same reason, right? We have to make sure that people in urban environments know where their food comes from, know how their food is produced, and have a connection also to the land. There's a great value in learning about the effects of industrial farming. There's a great value in urban community gardens being spaces where people can socialize and build community. And there's a great value in also having a separate resources of food being produced in local cities in event, let's say there's a disaster. When we had Hurricane Sandy, we had trouble getting gasoline into our city. But if we've ever encountered a situation like that again, we could probably have a resource of food here in our own city that'd be able to feed New Yorkers for a few days.
Yeah, I definitely want to second what both these gentlemen said. So in the interest of not being redundant, I'll try to bring up a couple of different points. So speaking on Sandy, when Sandy happened, Gotham Green's produce was actually available in supermarkets the next day. So that really underscored the impact that we can have on sort of supply chain and resiliency that you alluded to. And I think to Henry's point, in the global south and the developing world, urban agriculture does do the majority of food production to feed people. I think to think about, in the West, to think about urban agriculture not meeting enough of the city's foods needs, I think misses the point of urban farming. I think urban farming is about community, it's about education, it's about pedagogy, and I think for certain types of food crops that are highly perishable and can grow in a viable, profitable way using new technology, then I think it can be a meaningful provider of fresh produce. So for instance, our company focuses on highly perishable leafy greens, herbs, and other things that often have to travel thousands of miles to reach us here in New York. So if we can grow them in greater proximity to the city, we can actually grow a meaningful amount of, say, fresh basil that doesn't have to be flown in from Hawaii or Israel or places that are further afield. So in the cases of certain types of food crops, I think urban farming can actually produce a meaningful amount of a city's needs.
Can you actually, Viraj, can you just briefly talk a little bit about the volume that Gotham Greens produces? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we, in New York City, we have 3 commercial scale greenhouses, and we produce about 10 million heads of leafy greens or herbs per year. So, for order of magnitude, like our revenues are now in the multi-millions of dollars. We have 160 employees. So it is, we have 5 trucks that ply the roads, making deliveries 365 days of the year to New York City restaurants. And we also have operations in Chicago and other cities. So I think it's really evolved from a small scale type of operation to now, a reasonably sized commercial operation.
Obviously, ditto to everything the gentleman just said before me. They raised all of the points that you often hear from urban growers about why this is important. I think something that we haven't quite talked about yet is the power of people to feed themselves. We're always talking about where people are getting their food from as if everyone needs to be eating food that's shipped to them by someone else. And I think what is at danger in that scenario is that people lose their own sovereignty to feed themselves and their communities in ways that don't have to depend on this capitalist system that we're working within. And I think for the people who are most at risk in this capitalist system, that is a very dangerous scenario to be in, to constantly be dependent with your hand out on someone to feed you and your family. So what we want to make sure that we're doing and what we can do with community food systems and projects is that we're empowering people to grow for themselves. We're getting out of the way of people so that they can grow and feed themselves. It's not about empowering them. It's often about providing the resources that they desperately need and getting out of the way. I think this question brings up this idea that, that there's not enough food on the planet already. There is too much food on this planet. There are actual industries that are growing up around food waste. If you've heard of imperfect produce, right? There's huge venture capital companies all about salvaging food that is already grown and wasted in our society. There's enough food. The problem is that it's not in the right people's hands. It's not close enough to the people who need it. So a lot of what we're dealing with here is a distribution problem. I think urban agriculture, bringing that food closer to the communities that need it and putting that power in their hands is the solution to this issue. At least part of it.
Thanks, Onika. That's exactly the direction I was headed in. I'm going to speak from a personal perspective. urban agriculture right now currently feeds those who need it the most, those who lack access to healthy, fresh produce. I started farming about 10 years ago because I was working in communities where people didn't have healthy, fresh produce in their neighborhoods, didn't necessarily feel comfortable like going to places like Whole Foods to buy food, who felt like eating fresh foods was something that was like something for other people. And I'm African. Eating fresh food is like a normal thing. Eating vegetables is not a normal thing. It's not something for the elite. So I personally started growing food to show people like, an organic carrot is your right. You should be able to eat it. You should be able to grow it. It's not that big of a deal. Organic carrots don't belong in Whole Foods. They don't belong in a special place. They belong in your backyard. They belong on your windowsill. They should always be accessible to you. And a lot of my work has been twofold: producing food for people, but also educating people about growing food for themselves. And then environmental sustainability is a big deal. We need everyone involved in environmental sustainability. We want to create a generation of citizens and not consumers. And I think the conversation around food production is always about growing food to feed people. No, we want everyone to be involved in the process of food production. We want everyone to understand the connections between how food is grown and environmental impact. So those things are really important. And I use my farm space as an example of that. You know, what are the connections between fish farming and ocean farming, or also like the just wiping out of ocean stock. What are those connections? How do we raise fish in a sustainable way? What role do pollinators play in our environment? Stop using antibiotics because it's killing us. We need microbes to grow food. Whether you're growing food in soil or you're growing food in water, microbes are like the foundation of our existence as human beings. And you really have robust, those types of conversations on a farm. It's very difficult to have it in other places. I'll be quiet now, but yeah.
It's always hard to be the sixth person on a smart panel.
Sorry, Aziz.
I'll sit over there next time.
We'll start this way next time.
I'm not going. So to amplify a couple of things, I want to make you just a little bit uncomfortable for a second. We're talking about food justice, and we're talking about the capability of this city to supply fresh food to people in communities that don't have it. So we don't call it food deserts, we call it food apartheid, because that's really what it is. It was intentional, and it continues to be, and if we in this room don't fight to change that, nothing we say here will change it. So when you talk about urban ag, you have to include community gardens, you have to include the industrial part of this, you have to include the sustainability of it, but you also have to include the people who are there, who are taking land and making it viable. I mean, in the community garden world, we took over land that was that burned down, the buildings burned down on. And through sweat equity, we've created these spaces where people can feed themselves to a certain extent. And not just feed themselves, but to learn about other cultures. You all on the panel who know me have heard this story, and probably you all have too, but I'm gonna say it again. What's the most amazing thing about community gardens and about food and growing in community gardens is you learn from other people, you learn from other cultures. My people are from Iran, and we grow different, we eat different, but we learn from people who are from Africa, we learn from people who are from the West. And the beautiful part is that when you see people in these growing food, it's like, what is that? How do you cook that? And how do you eat that? That's what urban agriculture should be about too. It should be about the ability to learn from each other, to grow with each other, sorry about the pun, but it's really important to understand it's not just about food, it's about food justice, and it's a bigger piece than all of that.
So in those answers, a lot of you hit on this idea that about feeding people and communities feeding themselves, and so I want to jump to this discussion about urban farmers. Who is an urban farmer? I think across the country, when we talk about agriculture, especially in rural areas, the country's facing a massive shortage of farmers, and you see all these headlines like there isn't anyone to grow our food, right? Like we really need farmers. And you are all sort of talking about how we need to grow our own food. I would love for, and maybe we just like whoever wants to jump in on this. Do people that you work with, like, are you finding a lot of people do want to grow their own food, and who are the urban farmers that you work with?
Yes. In my work at Farm School NYC, obviously, I'm incredibly biased, right? I only meet people who want to grow their own food. I only meet people who want to grow food for community. We just accepted a new cohort of students, and we only were able to accept 25% of the people who applied. So there's a huge demand, and I think when people, I couldn't help rolling my eyes just slightly when you talked about, this need for farmers, because people grow our food, right? I think what we have is a misperception about what a farmer really is. I think we perceive farmers as people who are owner, operator, business owners of a particular, business, food-growing business. There are people of all backgrounds, mostly immigrants, people who are growing our food. There are farm workers who come from communities, people from communities of color who've been growing food for generations, who actually really, a lot of them really love this work. What they don't have is, one, status to work in this country, which is a huge issue, right? So there's all of those issues around, can they legally be here, or are they being run out of this country? They don't have access to resources, to actual land, so that they can become owners and operators of their own, of their own operation. I think that's a huge issue. We need to be able to find people. These are folks that want to grow, have the capacity to do so, do not have the resources, do not have the right. And I think if we really cared about new farmers in this country, we would look to those farm workers and invest in them instead of chasing them out of our country. Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox for a minute. That usually has a lot more bearing in rural communities than it does in an urban community. So I would say here in New York City, it runs the gamut of diversity. Backgrounds. I see a lot of people. Of color who are looking back to the land as a way to kind of, farming by its very nature is a pretty oppressive endeavor. It has traditionally been very oppressive to people, and it's often oppressive to the land in some ways. So I think people are trying to reclaim that in their own way and are coming back to farming. So I see that across. I don't see a lack, but I think maybe people who are hiring might feel differently. I'm not sure.
We see a real renaissance as evidenced by this room, right? I mean, this event is 3-4 years old now, and it grows and grows and grows. So I do think we are going through a renaissance in this country, and we have been for the past decade, around food education and people wanting to know more about their food, how it's produced, who is producing it. So we sort of went through people doing that earlier in the last century, and then it moved towards vast industrialization of the food systems, and now it's sort of swaying a little bit in the other direction, as evidenced by the dozens of brands that are exhibiting here that are disrupting regular categories around dairy, meat, plant-based food, vegetables. So I do believe as a part of this, there's more young people that are looking to get into this industry as a career, as a vocation, and are pursuing advanced degrees or even training programs, bachelor's degrees in food production and agriculture. So there used to just be a handful of land-grant universities that had ag programs in this country, and now you're seeing a huge swell of programs. And I think food production at its core is plant sciences, and you need more people with those backgrounds. So we're seeing in our industry, our sort of niche within urban farming and food justice, are seeing more and more young people wanting to get into farming and food production as a profession.
So, I wouldn't be so naive to say I understand all farmers. I'm always humbled by farmers and the work that they do. When it comes to urban agriculture, I do have some perspective on it through my experience. And what I've found is that, it's not a typical job description. Sure, as the companies get bigger, you start to have more focused areas in horticulture or in engineering, et cetera. But if you're just trying to enter the space, you really need to build up a pretty diverse set of experience. And I break that out into 3 categories. One is you need to understand the data. What crops are grown? What are typical yields? What are the typical challenges with that? And I call that your archive. The second is you need to build your network. Every single urban farmer depends on other urban farmers to share best practices. So you need to experiment with the give and take process of the local food system. And then the other piece is hands-on experience. Even if you want to be just in the marketing side, if you don't understand how these farms work, if you don't volunteer in some farms, if you don't have legitimate experience growing food, it's going to be very hard for you to grow as an urban farmer and develop your career in that space. And so one of the things that we've done is, as Agritecture Consulting hasn't been able to answer questions for every young person that comes to us, we've developed a sister company called AgTechX with Ricky Stevens here, which is essentially a WeWork for urban ag. So you can come in, you can rent a desk by the month, you can ask any questions, you can make mistakes, you can grow your network, grow your data, and with a very low investment, you can extend your experience and enter the urban agriculture space in New York City specifically. So I think you really have to think about the varied experience you want in the beginning, usually about a 6-month experience, and then you want to focus in. You want to say, okay, this is who I am in this industry. I'm in the marketing side, I'm in the engineering side, I'm in the growing side, I'm in the distribution side. And if you go through that process, I can guarantee you, you'll be successful and you'll be able to make a pathway in this industry in New York.
Like Onika said, there's not a lack of people who are interested in farming. There's a lack of resources to support people who are interested in farming. So I went through the Grow NYC Beginner Farmer Program, which helps, get people. Actually, when I first learned about the program, they were working specifically with immigrants. It was a program for immigrants. It was a program to give immigrants dignity so that they could have jobs that they have skills in and feed their family. The program has changed and expanded a little bit, but it only works for people who are farming in rural areas. It doesn't work for urban farmers. There needs to be something that's a combination of farm school and Grow NYC Beginner Farmer Program specifically for young farmers. And when I say young farmers, I don't necessarily mean youth, but anyone who is interested in farming. It doesn't matter how much you want to farm if there aren't resources and policies in place to support you. Young people come to my farm all the time and want to know if they can be farmers in the future, and I tell them become a policymaker. Because if you're not a policymaker, there is no urban farming in the future. So I was going to say something else, but I forgot. But yeah, resources is so important. It doesn't matter if you desire it, if there are not policies and there's not land in place. Community gardeners get land snatched from them every day. If you want to learn how to farm, community gardens are the place to start. Before anything else, because you go into your community garden, you learn from everyone. You learn from elders. You learn from young people. But what happens when you get out of that space if you want to make that your career? There are no resources for that, especially if you're from certain communities.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. As a policymaker, it's true what she's saying. There isn't enough people in government that see this as an asset, that see the reason why we should be supporting this moving forward. We're seeing community gardens being lost day by day. And I mentioned this at a panel yesterday. There's a garden called Mandela Garden in Harlem that right now is currently being bulldozed by the city of New York to build housing. And over the past few years, we went from having 1,000 gardens to only about 500 gardens today. So we have to continue putting policy in place that's going to give these gardens the resources they need to stay in place, but also put policy in making the city be serious about how do we look at other opportunities where we can increase the amount of land that's going to be farmable moving forward.
Last again. So Rafael actually brings up a really good point, and as you do too. So I'm a farmer. I had a farm in the 70s, and I had an organic farm in New Jersey in the 70s. It's backbreaking work. I'll push back a little against Henry in that in your sector, it's a lot more detailed than in the way we farm, and land farming is very different, I think. You get out there and you learn I learn by mistake, and I think that's often the best way to do things. But what Rafael's just said is really, really important, and I'll just make a real dot on this one. Mandela Garden in Harlem had a temporary restraining order put on it so that HBD couldn't take it away. They defied the judge, and 2 days later they bulldozed the garden into the ground. And it's not the first time we've seen this. And so what we're up against isn't just education, it isn't just, oh, let's get out and farm and make food. It's about preservation. It's about making this city a livable city. And, I'm going to kiss up to you, Rafael, because he's one of the councilmen.
I've learned from Aziz.
He's one of the council people who's actually doing something to try to make this change. Will it work? I don't know. I'm not a policy person. I'm just kind of following this thing and trying to figure it out. But policy and people, I mean, all of you, get out there and get a shovel. Get out there and reclaim some land. Because as we sit, gardens are being taken away. Open space is being taken away. Ever since the indigenous people were overtaken by Europeans, this land has always been about development. And we have to be really careful about that, because one day we're going to go walk outside and there'll be nothing left.
Thank you. Can I just say one thing?
go ahead.
You know, I think what's underscoring and what makes what you're saying, Aziz, so important is that I believe very deeply that healthy food is a human right. That is our right as being human beings in this world. And if we truly believe that, then community gardens and farmland in urban areas is essential infrastructure. Okay, so when people start talking about, is it scalable, what's the market value of this company or this community garden or things like that, they're missing this point that if we believe that food is a human right, then essential infrastructure is the land that we are growing on. And that means that we need to invest in it and treat it as a resource that is actually essential. And I think that's what we end up, this false dichotomy of housing and food is really damaging.
And it's about gentrification too. I mean, where do we do, you know, how, the woman who used to run HBD had when she was at NYU, had a paper out, and she said, and she knew this for a fact, that properties within 1,000 feet of community gardens saw their values go up. And I always ask Vicky Bean, is the opposite true? When you take community gardens away, do property values go down? Because they're coming in because the community gardens are making those neighborhoods better. She never answered me. In fact, she banned me from meetings. Great, it was great.
Viraj, did you want to add something?
Just to build upon that, I think urban agriculture, I mean, obviously these guys have been talking about this, but it helps to make our cities a little bit more green, more accessible, more livable. There's a lot of tangible, but also intangible benefits you get from that, right? You know, tangibly you have ecosystem services around stormwater management, around pollinators, around native species, and then intangibly there's proven, you know, there's psychology around people's disposition and physical health being better when they're sort of around plants. And again, as the audience knows at this point, there's a lot of different applications of urban farming, right? There's high tech on one end of the spectrum, commercial scale industrial, there's sort of community driven on the other. And our approach at Gotham Greens has also been to really adaptively reuse dilapidated, underserved urban space to produce sort of commercial farms. So whether it's on rooftops, whether it's on brownfield sites, former steel mills, former factories that have sort of fallen into real economic decline, right? You know, our project in Chicago, it's on the far, far south side of Chicago, one of the most impoverished urban areas in the country. And, you know, we've produced 60 jobs on a former steel mill by creating this high-tech greenhouse. And we're doing another one in Baltimore on a former steel mill, in Providence at a former General Electric light bulb factory. So I think it also, there is this narrative of adaptively reusing urban space, making it more green, making it more innovative, and it sort of represents this 21st century economy, which I think is really exciting.
Awesome. So it's time to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have questions for our panelists? Yeah. If you could just speak up. I don't think we have a microphone, so just project.
I've got one. Oh. Who had the question? Okay.
So I guess to contextualize my question, I'm a rural farmer, and I'm curious to hear your response to the issue of nutrient flows. So I think urban farming is great in the sense that you're no longer dependent on transportation from a rural area into a city, but it then shifts that transportation need up the production line in the sense that you need to import fertility. And you're then dependent on sort of industrialized fertility sources. So my question is twofold. Where are you getting your fertility to produce your food, and what are you doing with your waste streams?
We use compost.
I use fish waste to grow. I recycle fish waste to grow my plants, so there is actually no waste. And my fish are my nutrient generators along with microbes. So,
Right. And just like Aziz says, most of the projects that we work with at Farm School have composting on site and are recycling your nutrients on site.
We use a combination of organic and synthetic nutrient sources, but use closed-loop recirculating systems. So we're reusing those nutrient sources over and over and over again and using about 1/10 less water than conventional farming while eliminating all sort of fertilizer runoff, which is one of the leading sources of global water pollution.
Yeah, our clients, we consult across the spectrum from low-tech all the way to high-tech, so it ranges from compost all the way to organic nutrient solutions to synthetic nutrient solutions, so it really varies. But I guess what I will say is I think that the future urban food system should include food hubs and other methods to produce that fertilizer on site or close to the city, managing compost. There's some examples of that in New York City already. But I think if we just look at it from individual farm bases, that's not very efficient and that's not a long-term sustainable system. So I think similarly, there needs to be that infrastructure development as part of the food system design.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a speaker on environmental toxins. And so my question is I'm all for localized farming, but what efforts are being made to protect the food from the environmental toxins, of which there are many in New York City and in the city areas, PCBs, PFAs?
In the community gardens, anybody who's growing food has to grow them in raised beds with a barrier to make sure that they're, these lots were buildings and you just don't know what's in the ground necessarily, and sometimes we don't want to know. But we've tested a lot of parcels, and we know that we have to grow on raised beds. In terms of the airborne materials, there's a coming theory or a coming way to grow where you start growing vegetables that don't absorb like that. And you use other planting materials to absorb and try to clean the air. It's difficult. I mean, you're in the city. It's a great question. I don't really have a specific answer other than that's what we're trying to do, and we're cognizant of it. But geez,
Because people are eating it then, and you want to create it, you
Right.
want it to be healthy, but you
Right.
at the same time allow it to
Yeah.
give people cancer.
Yeah. I can tell you just from the 500 community gardens, and maybe half of them grow food, everybody's really careful about that and understands the balance that's there. It's not easy. It's a great question, though.
Yeah.
Our city sprays glyphosate. Rafael probably knows this, but glyphosate, which is Roundup, is sprayed in all of our public parks. Everywhere. Children play in it, it's on grass. Then Palis has a bill out to get it.
Yeah, I'm signed on.
You signed on to it, great. Yeah.
NoSpray.org is another organization that's fighting to stop Roundup in the city.
Which is great. And glyphosate is a problem all over, everywhere, in rural and in urban communities, for sure. I would also just say, I think there are some best practices around making sure growing in raised beds is a great one. A lot of the airborne toxins are also disturbed with the surface of the soil, so we talk about really composting the top of it, making sure that you're doing cover cropping and things that keep the dust of the actual soil from becoming airborne in the first place is a really big thing. And then also just trying to be really careful about post-harvest production and the washing and things of that. But it's definitely a legislative level problem, I would agree.
So yeah, I mean, if you talk to Brooklyn Grange, if they're willing, they have some compelling evidence about organic farm versus their farm and the toxins that they receive. So I won't comment on that because you should talk to them, but they're looking into that specifically, and I think it's pretty compelling.
Is Brooklyn Grange?
Brooklyn Grange, yeah, leader in urban agriculture, I would say, in a lot of ways.
Also, before we take the next question, I'll just ask folks at the back of the room, I love that there are conversations happening. If they could be quieter and if they can go downstairs, that's preferred. I really want to keep focus between the conversation that we're having. Is there another question? I see this woman's hand over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I've been a gardener and growing edibles for a long time now. And it's obviously a very difficult thing to get access to land. I was wondering, in public situations, it seems like it's a better option for a lot of people doing community gardening, but frankly, it's difficult and a lot are shady, to grow vegetables. You need a lot of sun. A lot of buildings are not set up to have sunlight in the city, and land is super expensive, and apartments are expensive, and roofs are expensive. So I was just wondering, for the everyday gardener or farmer in the city, is there, to get more people involved, are there initiatives that anyone knows about where people are making it, better choices for buildings having bigger windows facing east and south, et cetera, for people to be able to grow, because you can't have, obviously, large areas growing a lot of veggies in the city very easily. Just can't happen.
We're doing a lot of work in the city council. We actually have a bill that's going to force the city to sit down and create a policy plan of how they're going to support urban ag moving forward, identifying key areas that could be turned into either indoor or outdoor gardens to make sure that New Yorkers have more access to that. We also passed a bill that created the city's first urban ag website, and if you go to nyc.gov, there's an urban ag portal which will give you all of the information you need in order for you to be able to start your own farm, whether you're starting a farm in a school, whether you're doing something indoors, whether you're doing something in your yard, or whether you want to use a garden as well. So we're beginning to start that conversation, and there's resources that are coming in, but we have to continue doing more, and that's the reality.
Where's your garden?
I was gardening at a historic house. I sell herbs. I actually rent a space upstairs.
Okay.
And I sell herbs in handmade containers right now. But
So I'm going to pitch it. New York City Community Garden Coalition, nyccgc.org. Come online, become a member, contact me. We'll give you sites, links, and give you as much resources as we possibly can. I mean, that's why we do what we do, is to make better, more, and bigger community gardens. But it's an issue, again. I mean, you know.
I did a community garden at Gardner, and I was in a great place. It was shady, it was wonderful, but it wasn't farming.
Yeah, no, I get it.
A couple of years ago, the zoning department of the city of New York did pass a resolution that a lot of us advocates worked for, which was to exempt, this is very specific and niche, so take it with a grain of salt, but it would exempt building owners from floor to area ratio restrictions. So in layman's terms, that's height restrictions, if one were to build a greenhouse that was used specifically for agricultural purposes. So it is quite specific and niche, like I said, but it really opened the door to a lot of folks who want to build greenhouses on rooftops to grow produce. So that was a concerted effort between city council, the zoning department, the former mayor, and other policymakers.
Other questions? Oh, right here.
This question is for the councilman. Can you expand a little bit on the status of that urban agriculture bill and where it's heading? I do remember that last year there was a little bit of a confusion, especially in the community gardening and the food justice world, about the role and who the stakeholders were. So I'm hoping that you might give us a process going forward and who's going to be at the table. And is there a written bill yet again, or is it similar to the old bill or such? Whatever you want to tell me.
Yeah, so a few years ago, with the board president, Eric Adams, and Henry and Aziz and a lot of other advocates, we created a bill, and the bill was simply outlining what the city should be doing to create a policy plan that would support urban ag across the 5 boroughs. We had intense conversations with the mayor's office. They did not want to do the work. They did not want to see that bill pass as it was written. We were facing a clock because our first term in our session was over, and I thought it was important that we pass something. Even though the mayor's office didn't want to pass that big policy plan, we should pass something in order to get the conversation going, moving into the next term. So we were able to turn that bill into pushing the city to create the first urban ag website that the city has ever created, focused on, as I mentioned earlier, providing New Yorkers with the resources they need to start, any sort of urban farm, whether it be indoors, outdoors, community, rooftop, and that currently exists, right? So we recently reintroduced the former bill that would push the city to create that policy report, And I have to say that we've been having intense conversations internally. We also got Columbia University to create a report on what that, giving the city a framework on what that report should look like. So we have more resources that we were able to put together. The advocacy is still there, and I'm hoping to have a hearing on that greater bill at some point. I also introduced a bill alongside of that one, which would give gardens further protections from city agencies from revoking their licenses and give them more of a timeline so they can fight back any of these proceedings, as we heard about Mandela's Gardens as well. So on top of the original bill we introduced a few years ago, we also have some supplemental bills that I think will be helpful on the overall conversation. I have to schedule a hearing at some point. That is not up to me. The chair of the committee who oversees that bill has to put that on their docket. But once that happens, I'm sure working with our partners, we'll get that information out to everyone.
I think maybe we have time for one more
One
question.
very fast question.
Quick question.
I'm curious about, is anyone teaming up to solve other urban issues with urban agriculture, specifically our sewer issues? There's an initiative to create green infrastructure to deal with, especially in New York City, we have combined sewer systems. So when it rains, we pour our untreated sewage into our surrounding waterways, and if we have green infrastructure, we could mitigate that issue. And I was wondering about anyone working.
Yeah, I think Councilman Espinal has another bill forward for rooftops to have green roofs, which is part of that. And also, I think we're trying to work on recognizing that community gardens themselves should be contributing to green infrastructure. Even though they may be smaller, collectively, they make a huge impact on green infrastructure. And I don't see why they're not recognized for that, why they're not given money for that, why they're not supported and protected for that reason, because they play a critical role in that issue, which has money allocated for it already by the DEP and the city. So I think that there's also another consideration is different kinds of urban farms can impact that in different ways. Vertical farms typically don't impact green infrastructure, but greenhouses like Gotham Greens, they have a way to do that. They can manage that rainwater, they can slow it down in some way if they make that investment. So they should be supported as well. And then the rooftop gardens and the soil-based gardens can help to slow down that water. If it's in an area where the issue's even more critical, like a zone 1 flood zone, those incentives should be higher and that protection should be even more. So I think there's more work to be done, but Councilman Espinal is one of the leaders doing that.
And the New York City Community Garden Coalition received a grant from the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, which was from the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy. And we're working with the 47 community gardens on the Lower East Side to do just what you said, to take as much stormwater out of the combined sewer outflows and put them into community gardens. After Sandy, the buildings around community gardens were less destroyed and less damaged, because community gardens absorb water. So that we're in this project, it's a community-based project, it's all the gardeners, all the gardens have the responsibility to decide what green infrastructure will come about. So we do rain gardens, we're adding more trees, tree pits, bioswales, there's a host of different things, rain barrels, and it's all about that. And it's a project that we hope, it's been stalled a little bit because of the funder side, but we're beginning to move ahead. And we are going to do a lot of green infrastructure, and hopefully this will be a pilot project for the rest of the city. I mean, it's inexpensive and it works. The one caveat is that I'm not the smartest guy in this room for sure. I always, next superstorm, we'll be able to protect everything. No. But we can, and we see heavy rains, 2, 3, 4-inch rainstorms. That's where we as community gardens, we as stormwater management, green infrastructure pieces can actually make a difference.
Great, and I think we have to actually stop it there, but thanks to everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.